riding the 2025 Honda CRF450RX and 250RX today. And yeah, the differences are pretty apparent. You kind of just look at it and think, oh, it's just another version of the R, but there is a lot of differences with the suspension and the ECU, the big tank, the tires. You can still get down like on the moto track and have fun on this bike, but if you're going to be racing like West Coast off-road or even East Coast off-road, we've been doing so much GNCC stuff lately, like this would be the bike you'd want to ride if you're going to be a Honda rider and you want to do that stuff. Hey guys, I'm Ryan Nitzen. Welcome to another 2025 first ride. This is the new Honda CRF450RX. We are also here riding the CRF250RX today. Honda kind of went all out this year. They redid the 250, they redid the 450R models, so the standard motocross race models, and then the off-road race models, the RX, the 250 and the 450 also received the same changes. So they're calling it about a 70% redesign. There's a new frame, a new subframe, new airbox, new bodywork, all those things that you saw on the 450 and the 250. If you haven't seen those videos, check out our channel. You'll be able to find our full test and first look videos for the 250 and the 450 Honda models. The RX though, on the other hand, is very similar to the R. If you think of, this is the off-road race model, so for NGPC racing, Grand Prix style racing, and GNCC for the East Coast guys, this is gonna be the bike that you're gonna wanna ride. You see the JCR guys, the SLR Honda teams here on the West Coast, then the Phoenix Honda team on the East Coast. This is the model that they choose to ride. And the reason they do so is because it comes standard with the bigger tank, an 18-inch rear wheel, different suspension settings, different ECU settings. So based heavily on the R model, this is still gonna be the race model. If you think of the Honda lineup, you have the R and the RX are very similar. You call those relatives, those are brothers. And then you have the L and the X, those are two brothers. Those are like the similar models. So kind of a little breakdown for you guys showing you what the different models are and how they're related. It's kind of become a little bit confusing, I feel like. They offer so many models now in the Honda lineup. Got my cheat sheet here. I'm gonna show you guys some of the stats and specs of what makes the RX different than the R. So first up, the RX is $300 more than the standard R model. The RX retails for an MSRP of $99.99, where the standard CRF450R retails for an MSRP of $96.99. So for $300 more, what do you get? You're gonna get Dunlop AT81 tires on this bike. You get an 18-inch rear wheel, which has more sidewall for off-road riding as compared to the MX34 Dunlops with a 19-inch rear wheel that are better for motocross riding. You'll find that on the standard R model. Along with that, you're gonna get handguards up front here, and they are mounted to the lever. So one thing that I am a little bit particular with, I like to scoot my levers pretty far in, and when you do that, you move the handguards in as well. So it's cool that they come with it. That's just a personal thing for me. Maybe you guys are running the standard levers and the positioning, but you do get handguards up front that are standard, and you do get a side stand, which is nice. Obviously no stand that I gotta load up, or if you're on the side of the trail, you can just throw the kickstand down. You're also gonna get a 2.1 gallon fuel tank in comparison to the 1.7 gallon fuel tank that comes standard on the R model. So a little bit extra fuel for you off-road guys if you want to do some racing or you just want to do a longer ride. You're also going to get a sealed chain out here in the rear.
What's up everybody, I'm Jesse Ziegler with Cycle News. We got to ride both bikes, 450 and 250 RX. They're kind of like the closed course competition do-it-all bike from Honda. We get all the updates on the R models that we appreciate this year in the shootouts. If you've read any of the shootouts, you know Honda's really stepped up their game. So they're sort of carrying those updates over to the RX line, hopefully seeing the same success out on the track. These are bikes built for 2-hour plus races. Competitors need an aggressive power plant, but also a little bit of compliance built into the suspension and maybe the engine mapping to get them better. It's just been a great day. It's good to see the bikes are performing just as we expected, and it's been awesome.
Hey guys, I'm Ryan Nitzen. I'm joined here with Jesse Ziegler. We just wrapped up riding the Honda CRF RX line. I've now ridden every R and RX model, 250 and 450, the Works Edition, the standard R, and now the RX on all three the 250 and the 450, all three versions. So I kind of rode the 450 most of the day. You kind of rode the 250 most of the day. The Works Edition is more like you just want to ride motocross.
Yeah, clearly.
You wouldn't really want to ride that bike off-road, where to me, the RX is kind of your one bike to do it all.
In general, the RX just brings a lot more diversity to the platform, and a lot of people buy Honda 450Rs, end up just riding them in the desert, riding them off-road in their hometown area, and it's not ideal for that. It's tuned, honestly, like on the aggressive side of everything to clear jumps out of corners and be super responsive in the most rough motocross track conditions. The best part about an RX style bike in the market is it's closed course competition, so it's still capable at motocross tracks and that kind of racing. It's still aggressive, but it's toned down to the point where you can hang on to it for an hour or 2 hours in a longer GP race. Yeah. And then for a lot of people in the market, it's a better motocross bike because of that. It's not quite as hard edged and that kind of stuff. I think that the extended fuel range and just the wheel size, so you have different tire options, makes it attractive because, you know, that 18-inch rear, it gives you so much more traction feeling and bump compliance feeling, even on a motocross track. Yeah. It's a great thing. And we can remind you that's the main change between an RX and an R is fuel capacity, suspension, ECU, engine management adjustments to make it a little softer suspension, a little softer hitting, and obviously an 18-inch rear tire to make it more compliant. And really that makes it just like a better overall package if you think you're gonna do a GP race someday, or if you think you're gonna do a Works or an NGPC or GNCC type racing. I've actually raced this model, the 250RX at a GNCC, and you know, it was fantastic. It's a great size bike and it's got the right parts on it. Where if you took an R there, you'd be kind of hating life after about an hour.
The other thing too, for the guys that don't know at home, the RX goes up against things like the XCF for the KTM, the YZFX. So it's kind of in that category where it's based heavily off of the motocross bike, like the KTM is. The XCF and the SXF, the FX and the F are very similar. It's not until you get into the X and the L for the Honda, or the XCW, like that for the KTM, WR for the Yamaha. Yeah. Those are where you find the big differences, but this bike is heavily based off the motocross bike. So I rode the 450RX today, mostly in the mellow map. And one thing that I noticed is the new bike is super fast, but it's a lot more controllable than it used to be. It's not as light switch on or off. So I've ridden the standard R on some trail riding, and the RX to me is just a lot smoother from the bottom especially. And then I just rode around in second gear almost all day around this single track loop, just everywhere. And I didn't have to use the clutch a ton. I could just roll on the gas. I ended up messing with the traction control as well, just because it's super dry here. There's like sandy on top of hard pack. So I used the traction control and I ran map 2 with 1 level of traction control. It just tamed the whole bike down. You still had all the grunt of a 450 that you like, but a lot more controlled and a lot easier to ride. I thought that was really fun.
The 450 was still just honestly too much for me here, so I really had more fun on the 250RX. The 450 was just, you know, a wild machine out there. The 250 was just fun. I could keep it in the aggressive map, and the aggressive map, in my opinion, on both bikes is actually a little cleaner. Yeah. So it fuels a little better, even though it's got more hit and more power. It's actually a little more smooth in that delivery, so it gives you a little bit more, you know, control, but you're just going a lot faster. So on the 250RX, leave it in the aggressive map just about anywhere. I didn't feel the need for traction control on that either, just because the power delivery is so smooth in this motor. It's got plenty of torque, and it just felt really good. You know, combining that newfound torque that they got with the airbox change in the 250R and the rigidity of the crank, they created some torque in this motor somehow, and you add a big meaty, you know, Dunlop on the back of that thing, and it makes this 250RX a fun ride. If I was personally buying one, I would just stick with the 250 and race the 250 classes, because the 450s, honestly, it's a lot. It's a serious bike. Don't think you're gonna get a 450RX and just get a trail bike. Obviously, these intros get a lot of praise. Everybody loves everything about the bike. It's all, yeah, everything's hunky-dory, but there's gotta be something on here you don't like, or maybe a couple of things. Give me your top 2 or 3 things that you wish weren't there.
All right, I got 3 bones to pick with this bike. First one is the handguards. I mentioned it in the intro video, but I like to move my levers in a lot, and the only thing about these handguards, I like having handguards on the bike, but since they're mounted to the lever, as I move the lever in, I lose coverage of my hand and the end of the bar. Not a huge deal. You could just get some aftermarket handguards, but to have handguards that come on the bike, it's cool. Personally, the stock ones, they're okay. They, you know, it's cool that you have them, but I bummed out that I lose coverage when I move them in. Second one, tank. I like having the big tank, especially for an RX. It's nice to have. I think it's a huge advantage over something like the Kawasaki that doesn't come with a big tank. Yeah. This bike has a big tank, super nice. But when I'm motoing or some of the motocross sections here, and I'm super far up in the tank, it feels wide. The standard R doesn't feel like that. And then when you have the big tank up here, yeah, it just pushes your legs out a little bit. You're running up front here, you know, putting your
sensitive bits.
Yeah, up on the front of the gas cap. It's a little bit difficult. Yep. Kind of something maybe you desert guys who run the big tank or the off-road guys who run the big tank are gonna be used to it, but personally just a little bit of a little annoyance. And then my last one is these tires. Dunlop made a huge step with the AT82s, the new ones. These are the AT81s, the previous generation. They had to get it all spec'd out before the bike came out, and the new tires were out. Personally, just really don't like them. I don't like the front tire. And then the rear is just a little bit, doesn't have as much traction as I'd like. So those are the only 3 things that I don't like. All things you could change, obviously, but just a few things that kind of struck my eye right away.
I'm going to agree with you on the AT81 front tire for sure. I think that thing has been unpredictable for most people since it came out. The AT82 has 0 of those issues. Use that tire as long as you want and then put an 82 on it and you're going to be happy. I don't have as big a problem with the rear. I think this rear tire is pretty good unless it's really hard pack and loose, then it'll slide around. So if you're not controlled in your turns, it's going to slide out a little faster for you. But it's got a good row, so if you're in some loam or some deep dirt, that's a really solid rear tire. I also don't agree with you on the hand guards because I keep my levers in a normal position. So they're, you know, my levers go into the grip, so my hand's always in the right spot. I do think these are nice hand guards as far as hand guards go. They're mounted sturdy. They're not a rock and a tree bashing hand guard. They're like a brush guard. They're pretty nice. I do wish that these RXs and this sort of X line of bikes all came with 6-speed transmissions personally, just because I think that opens it up to a much more broad use case. People can modify these in some states and even make them street legal, for instance, or maybe even use them as a trail bike. And if it had a 6-speed on it, man, you're in a zone where you can definitely go down the road faster. And even like guys in Baja or guys are racing Hare and Hounds, they're running up into a 5-speed sort of limitation on what they can do with the bikes. Yeah, they put sprocket changes on this bike, but that doesn't really give it more legs for top end if you're a serious racer. Certainly not talking about myself that much here, but I think that the market can justify 6-speed transmissions in a lot of these, but that's a big engineering thing. The transmission is going to get bigger and then everything gets a little weird. Yeah,
but some of the other bikes in the market do have a 6-speed that comes stock, so to me, that's just a little bit something that would be nice to have. Like you said, some of the racer guys, or the NGPC, there's a lot of fast courses. Some of the GNCC, there's a lot of fast sections. And a 6-speed, because you not only do you get the 6-speed, but the other ratios inside the transmission are different as well. So to me, it's a little bit be nice to have, but they're also keeping the price down. Obviously, when you go to invest into a new transmission, that's a lot of cost for the manufacturer. So they're trying to keep the cost down. But yeah, would be nice to have.
I think this bike fills the gap between the R and off-road really well. So what is the biggest differences you feel between this and an R if somebody's on the fence like, hey, I'm going to race moto sometimes, but I'm really going to race NGPC or Works or my local GP series? Like, what are the biggest differences you noticed?
Yeah, I feel like the suspension and the ECU to me are the biggest differences, and obviously the big tank having that. But to me, the front suspension, I had a lot softer feel. The 450R standard, it feels like it is a little bit soft for motocross, but if they ran, I know it's different valving and different setting in here, but if it's the same spring and all that that's on the standard motocross bike, it works really good off-road, and I feel like that made a big difference. Even with the bigger tank and a little bit heavier weight, the bike didn't feel very heavy. I could still kind of bounce around. I like a lot of front wheel traction, and so in the single track and maneuvering the bike through that, I definitely noticed that. And then the ECU as well, like you said, it felt cleaner in some of the other modes, and that's, I feel like, what I noticed the most in the new bike compared to the old bike, the old 24 and previous RX, is that it feels a little bit more, the ECU feels cleaner, it doesn't want to flame out, and it's smoother all around. So it's very smooth from the bottom to the mid. It still has a good pull up on top, but those are the two biggest things that I noticed. What about you?
I think R to RX, I've just spent a lot of time on the 250R actually recently, and the RX just, you know, it's really just a little bit more girth up here like you were talking about earlier. I don't think it's a negative if you're in this market to have that big tank. I think it's a great addition, and if you don't have more fuel capacity and you're claiming your bike's ready to race at NGPC or a GP race or a 2-hour race, like you're just kind of leading people astray because the bike's not ready to go. It has 2 gallons of gas. That's enough to get you, you know, to a gas stop and maybe one in a 2-hour race and you're good to go. So it's got more girth and it's a little bit softer in the suspension. That's really the only thing I feel. I don't feel the ECU changes on the 250R that much because I doubt they're that different than an R, honestly. I think the RX and the R and the 250 are probably pretty close. And it feels pretty close. I mean, I'd have to ride them both together on a motocross track to maybe feel that difference. I just think with the 250cc engine, it's not that overly violent already, so they probably don't have to detune it that much. But I'm sure there's some changes in there, and I know a lot of people will go back to an R map or use R parts in their RX to make this aggressive race bike, and I'm sure, like, you know, the Slam Life Racing guys, they do a lot of that stuff. So, you know, this is a great platform. There are some distinct differences, but like nothing that's really blown me away between a 250R and a 250RX. I think it's a great race bike, and that's what it is a race bike. If you're looking for something that's recreation only, keep shopping. But if you're gonna race or ride like you're racing, this is a great platform to go to. You're not getting a lot of compromise by going RX versus R, in my opinion, but you're getting a little bit more versatility. So
Yep. I think you'd be better off to buy an RX and ride moto than buy an R and ride off-road. That is kind of that is my wrap-up thoughts. That is how I feel about the RX.
Yeah.
This is the Honda CRF250RX and 450RX. Be sure to check it out in Cycle News Magazine. And if you haven't seen our first look at the 2025 Honda CRF250R and 450R, you'll be able to find all those videos on our channel.
Did you get a chance to get on one of the trials bikes?
Oh yeah, I rode the trials bike. I had to go with the Tony Bow edition, make myself at least look like I know what I'm doing, but it's so much harder than it seems. I've only ridden one other time, and just kind of jumping over some of the big tunnel or whatever, those tubes and the logs and stuff, it's a lot harder than it looks. But it was really fun.
So overall, good time.
Yeah, super fun riding today. Can't beat it. The new Honda frame and engine are so solid, and it's super comfortable as soon as you get on, and just a blast to ride.